I didn't cry when I left. I thought I would. I'd rehearsed it so many times in my head. The moment I finally walked out, I imagined I'd be shaking, maybe sobbing in my car before I even made it to the end of the driveway. But when it actually happened, I just felt quiet, like someone had turned the volume down on everything. That probably sounds strange. But when you spent years being someone's workhorse, there comes a moment where your body just runs out of the ability to be surprised. Let me back up. I'm the older daughter. That matters. In our family, it mattered more than anything else, more than how hard I worked, more than how much I gave, more than the fact that for 6 years I was the one keeping things together while my younger sister Tatum floated through life like she'd been born in a hammock. My parents named me Reeve. I was 29 when this happened. I worked as the operations manager for my father's landscaping company, Whitmore Green, established 1991. Built on family, it said right on the business cards. I'd been there since I was 23. Straight out of college, degree in business administration, my father had called me the week of my graduation and said, "We need you. The company needs you." And I said yes, because I believed in the company, and I believed in him, and I believed in him, and I believed that family meant something. My sister was 26. She had a job title at the company too, client relations coordinator. But what that actually meant was that she drove the nicer company truck, showed up to the client lunches, smiled at people, and left at 3. I handled the scheduling, the vendor contracts, the payroll, the equipment maintenance logs, the quarterly tax prep, the hiring. If Whitmore Green had a nervous system, I was it. Our parents knew this. Of course they knew. My father would come to me every time something needed fixing, every time a contract needed renegotiating, every time an employee had an issue that needed handling. He'd say, "Reeve, I need you to take care of this," and I would, every single time. What I didn't fully understand then, or maybe I understood but refused to look at directly, was that this was never going to be repaid. It wasn't an investment. It was just the arrangement. I worked. Tatum was taken care of. That was the family. The dinner was the last Saturday in October. My parents had done this thing they did a few times a year, a family dinner, which was really just my mother cooking a large meal, and my father using the table as a setting to announce things, a new contract, a truck purchase, whatever he'd decided. I drove over after a full day of site visits. I had mud on my boots and a headache I'd been carrying since Wednesday. Tatum was already there when I arrived, sitting in the living room with her legs tucked under her on the good couch, laughing at something on her phone. She looked up when I came in, gave me a half wave, went back to her screen. My mother was in the kitchen. She didn't look up either. I washed my hands. I sat down. I told myself it was just dinner. We were maybe 20 minutes in. My mother's pot roast, the good bread, everyone being careful and polite the way we always were. When my father put down his fork and looked at me with that expression I'd learned to dread, the one that meant he'd made a decision and he was about to explain it to me as if it were obvious. He said that the company was restructuring. He said that he and my mother had been talking about the future, about what made sense long term. He said Tatum was going through a difficult time and needed stability right now, and that they'd decided she would be moving into an expanded role with a salary increase and a company vehicle upgrade. I asked carefully what my role would look like in the restructure. He said my role wasn't changing. I did the math on that before he finished the sentence. Tatum, who did less, would now be paid more. I, who held the company together, would stay exactly where I was. I said that didn't seem fair. My father leaned back in his chair. My mother looked at her plate. Tatum reached for the bread. He said, "Reeve, your sister needs this right now. You're stable. You can handle it. That's always been who you are." I said, "I need things too." He looked at me the way you look at someone who said something embarrassing at a dinner party, like I'd violated a rule I should have known by heart. He said, "You've always had a roof over your head, a job, a salary. Your sister is struggling. That's the reality. If you can't support the family on this, then maybe this setup isn't working for you." My mother said nothing. Tatum refilled her water glass. I sat with that for a moment. The pot roast was getting cold. The candle in the center of the table was guttering a little, some draft from somewhere. As to my father, and I thought about 6 years of 7 a.m. starts and late vendor calls in the winter when our main equipment supplier went under, and I spent 3 weeks finding replacements so we wouldn't lose our spring contracts. I thought about the Henley account I'd saved with a personal apology call when our crew showed up to the wrong address. I thought about the payroll software I'd migrated us to when the old system crashed, the 18-hour days I'd put in so no one's check was late. I thought about all of it, and I realized he knew. He knew exactly what I'd done, and it hadn't changed the calculation at all. I put my napkin on the table. I said, "Okay." He looked slightly surprised. He'd expected, I think, more argument. I said, "I'll need some time to document my handover notes." My mother looked up then. I said goodnight. I got my jacket. I drove home. I didn't cry until I was in the shower, and even then it wasn't quite crying. It was more like something releasing. Like a pressure valve, I stood there until the water went cold, and I thought, clearly, maybe for the first time in years, I have been holding up a building that was never going to have my name on it. I gave myself the weekend. Monday morning I went in early. Earlier than usual, actually. I pulled every file I was responsible for. I made copies of everything I needed for my own records. I documented 6 years of operational work in a transfer binder, so thorough that even someone who'd never seen the inside of a landscaping company could follow it. I did this not out of spite, but because I am, genuinely, a professional, and I didn't want the employees, the crew leads, the admin staff, the guys who'd been with us since before I'd arrived, to be left hanging. I also, while I was in those files, found something. I'd been meaning to request a copy of my employment contract for months. I'd asked my father twice. Both times he'd said he'd get it to me. He never did. In the process of going through the company's filing system, which I had full access to, as operations manager, I found a document I hadn't seen before. It was a business line of credit, 3 years old, $75,000. My name was on it as a co-signer. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I pulled it out and read it again. My name, my social security number, my signature, except I had never signed this document. I had never been told this document existed. I had never agreed to co-sign a line of credit for the company or for anyone. I took photos of every page. I put the original back exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat at my desk and thought about how to proceed. I'm going to pause here because I want to be precise about how I felt in that moment. I wasn't panicking. I was surprisingly calm, the kind of calm that comes when something you've been sensing at the edge of your vision suddenly comes into focus. It's almost a relief in a horrible way. You haven't gone crazy. There it is. Now you know. I finished my shift. I said normal goodbyes. I stopped at the grocery store on my way home because I needed milk, and standing in the dairy aisle I texted my college friend Priya, who'd gone on to become a paralegal. "Hey, do you know any employment attorneys? Or anyone who handles financial fraud?" She called me back in 4 minutes. I spent the next 10 days doing 3 things simultaneously. I finished my handover documentation. I met with an attorney. Her name was Doris. She was 61, she wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had no patience for anything that wasted her time, which I appreciated. And I quietly requested my personal credit report, which revealed that the line of credit had, at one point, carried a balance of $62,000. Most of it had since been paid down, but it had been sitting on my credit history for 3 years. 3 years. Doris looked at the signature on the document. She looked at me. She said, "Is this your signature?" I said, "No." She said, "Do you have samples of your actual signature on record?" I said I had 6 years of signed documents in my own personnel file. She said, "Good." I resigned on a Thursday. I submitted a formal letter, professional, brief, 2 weeks' notice as required by my contract. My father called me within 20 minutes of sending it. I let it go to voicemail. He said I was being dramatic. He said every family business goes through growing pains. He said Tatum needed me to be supportive right now. I did not call back. What happened next is something I want to describe carefully because it unfolded over about 4 days and it went faster than I expected. The Friday after I resigned, my father called again. Twice. Then my mother called. A longer message, softer in tone, asking if we could talk, saying she was worried about me, saying the family was going through a difficult time and we needed to stay together. I listened to it twice. I noticed she didn't mention the line of credit. I noticed she didn't say she was sorry. Saturday, Tatum called. This was unexpected. Tatum almost never called me directly. She said in her message that Dad was stressed and that I was really putting everyone in a tough spot and that she hoped I wasn't doing this just to make a point. She said, "You know how the company needs you," which was, I'll note, the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in years. Sunday was quiet. Monday morning, Doris sent a formal letter on my behalf to Whitmore Green, LLC, addressed to my father as owner, notifying him that I had retained counsel regarding a fraudulent co-signing of a business line of credit bearing my name and forged signature, and that I was prepared to pursue full legal remedy, including but not limited to credit damage recovery, forgery investigation, and civil damages, unless the matter could be resolved through a structured negotiation within 30 days. My father called 4 times that day. I did not answer. He then called Priya. Somehow he'd gotten her number, I still don't know how, and she very calmly told him she wasn't able to speak with him and that all communication should be directed to my attorney. My mother texted me. It said, "Reeve, please, this is not who we are." I thought about that for a long time. Then I typed back, "I know exactly who we are, Mom. That's why I left. I want to tell you what the negotiation looked like because I think people imagine these things are dramatic. Courtrooms, confrontations, raised voices. It wasn't. It was paperwork and waiting and a few conference calls I sat through in Doris's office while she did most of the talking. What we landed on, my father agreed in writing, to have my name removed from the line of credit and to provide documentation to the relevant financial institution confirming the signature had been obtained without my consent. In exchange for not pursuing the forgery claim through criminal channels, he also agreed to pay me for 18 months of accrued overtime I'd never been compensated for, something Doris had calculated using the operational hours I'd documented in my own records. It came to $41,000. He paid it over 3 months. Every transfer, on time. We never spoke during those 3 months. I used part of it to cover expenses while I looked for work. Part of it went to Doris. Part of it. A small part, but this matters to me. I put into a savings account I opened in a bank my family had no connection to, with an account number no one in my family had ever seen. It was the first money I'd ever had that was purely mine. I found a position about 2 months after leaving. Operations director at a mid-size landscaping company in the next county. Same industry, which I knew cold. But a company I'd built no history with, no complicated feelings about, no residue. My first week, my new manager asked me to review their vendor contracts and I spent 3 hours updating clauses she'd never thought to question. And at the end, she looked at the revised document and said, "Where have you been?" I laughed. It felt good. The thing about leaving a situation like the one I was in, and I want to say this carefully because I know some people listening might be in their own version of it, is that the leaving itself isn't the hard part is the before. All the years you spend adjusting your expectations downward, telling yourself this is fine, this is just how families work, this is just a season. The hard part is the slow process by which you teach yourself to accept less than you're worth. The leaving when it finally happens can be almost easy. I'm not in contact with my parents right now. That might change. I haven't decided. What I know is that I'm not going to re-enter that dynamic on the same terms. The terms where I carry everything and receive nothing, where my stability is treated as permission to keep taking from me. Tatum called me once, about 6 weeks after the settlement. She didn't mention the money or the legal situation. She said she missed me. I think she meant it. I said I needed some time. That was true too. There's a community garden 2 blocks from my apartment. I started volunteering there on Saturday mornings, mostly because I needed something physical to do with my hands, something that had nothing to do with logistics or contracts or other people's problems. I show up, I work a section of raised beds near the east fence. I talk to the other volunteers about soil and weather and nothing that matters very much. It's become the part of my week I look forward to most. Last Saturday, a woman who tends the plot next to mine asked me what I did for work. I told her. She said, "Do you love it?" I had to think about it, which wasn't the answer I expected from myself. I said, "I love that it's mine." She nodded like that made complete sense. It does. It makes complete sense to me now in a way it wouldn't have 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago, I would have told you I loved the company, I loved the work, I loved being needed. And some of that was true. But some of it was also just what you tell yourself when the alternative, admitting that you've been shortchanged, that the people who were supposed to love you most have been treating you like a resource, is too painful to sit with. I'm sitting with it now. That's the thing no one warns you about when you finally leave. It's not the relief you feel, though the relief is real. It's the grief. You grieve the version of your family you thought you had. You grieve the years. You grieve the future you'd imagined, the one where things eventually evened out, where your father finally looked at you over some holiday table and said, "I see what you've done. I'm sorry. Thank you. That conversation is probably not coming. I've made a kind of peace with that." What I have instead is Saturday mornings and dirt under my fingernails and a job where my name is on my own work. I have an apartment that is quiet in the specific way that only my own choices can make a space quiet. I have 41,000 reasons to trust my own documentation, and Doris on speed dial, and Priya, who answered the phone in 4 minutes when I needed her to. Before I tell you the rest, and there is a rest, small things that have settled and shifted in the months since, I want to ask, where are you listening from today? And if you've ever been in a version of this, the place where you're the one holding everything while someone else is excused from holding anything, what made you finally put it down? Because I think about that question a lot. Not the dramatic moment. Not the dinner, not the letter, not even the filing cabinet where I found a document with a signature that wasn't mine. I think about all the smaller moments before that. Every time I said yes when I meant no. Every time I adjusted my expectations because it was easier than fighting. Every time I told myself it was fine, that it was just how families worked, that I was stable, I could handle it. It was just who I was. That's where it actually happens. Not in the big moment. In all the small ones where you choose or don't choose yourself. I'm choosing now. That's enough. For today, that's enough. I thought a lot about the moment I found that document, not the dinner. The document. Because the dinner was painful, but it was also, in some ways, something I'd been bracing for without knowing I was bracing for it. What I found in that filing cabinet was different. That was the moment I understood that what had been done to me wasn't just careless, it was deliberate. And here's what I've come to believe, not because anyone told me to believe it, but because I watched it play out in real time. The way you treat people has a logic to it, a cause and a consequence. My father spent years treating my reliability as an unlimited resource. He assumed I would absorb whatever was handed to me because I always had. That assumption, that I would keep carrying the weight no matter how unequally it was distributed, is exactly what led him to believe he could put my name on a document without my knowledge and face no consequence for it. One small compromise leads to another. The boundary keeps moving, until someone stops moving with it. That's not fate. That's not punishment from some outside force. That's just what happens when people are never asked to account for what they take. The tricky part, the part I had to sit with for a long time, was my own role in it. I don't say that to excuse what my father did. What he did was wrong, and Doris's letter made that plain in language that held up in a negotiation. But I also have to be honest, I stayed longer than I should have. I told myself it was loyalty. I told myself it was patience. Some of it was patience. But some of it was also fear. Fear of what it would mean about my family if I admitted things were broken. Fear that if I stopped being useful, I would stop being loved. That fear is worth naming, because it's the same fear that keeps a lot of people in situations that cost them more than they realize. What I found, on the other side of leaving, is that the intelligence I'd been pouring into someone else's company didn't disappear when I walked out. It came with me. Every skill I'd built, every problem I'd solved, every vendor I'd renegotiated with. All of it was mine. That's the thing about 6 years of real work. It doesn't belong to the place where you did it. It belongs to you. My new manager saw that in the first week. Doris saw it in the documentation I handed her. Even Priya answering her phone in 4 minutes because she heard something in my text, she saw it. What I know now, and what I want to say clearly, leaving isn't the brave part. The brave part is deciding that what you know about yourself, your value, your contribution, your basic right to be treated honestly, matters more than keeping the peace. Reeve didn't burn anything down. She documented everything. She retained counsel. She gave 2 weeks' notice. She was professional to the end. That discipline, that insistence on doing things the right way even when no one was doing right by her, that's what gave her something to stand on when it was over. You don't have to be loud to be unmovable. You just have to know what you're worth and stop accepting less than that as a starting point.